platforms. And now we are going to be live on our other half. All right, great. So depending on where you're calling from today, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. My name is Carlos Iniguez. I'm a project director and program director with Gen Accelerates, working to serve the Entrepreneurship World Cup competition and community alongside Dr. Susan Amat. Susan is not with us this week, but she will return next week. She sends her hellos to everybody. And we are looking forward to hosting today's talk. But before we actually introduce our presenter, I have a couple of announcements that we're going to make. So I'm going to share my screen here and make sure that we can actually take a look at some of these now. Just as a quick reference for everybody, now that applications are basically at the point of closing for a bulk of the world, just wanted to remind everyone on the left-hand side of this panel, if you are in global pool, okay, any of the countries here to the left, we will be reviewing your applications very soon. But in addition to that, you will also be expected to have completed your deliverables. Now, yesterday, we had sent out an email to all global pool countries, and the countries are actually in that email list. You will receive that email if you are in the global pool. There is access to the EWC Accelerate platform, so you'll have access to be able to click into that platform so that you can complete your deliverables. And those deliverables you can see down here below. If you are in the idea stage, early stage, or growth stage, the expectations are laid out. The application deadline has already passed. That was August 2nd. But if you have submitted your application, you will be expected to also complete your deliverables. The deadline for those deliverables is August 10th, 11:59 p.m. Miami time. 11:59 p.m. Miami time for your deliverables. After that, we won't be reviewing any other ones. So please be sure to get all of your deliverables in by then. And just as a special, as well, wish to all of our friends and colleagues in Lebanon right now, we're thinking of all of you. So please, know that we are, you're all in our thoughts and prayers right now. And we're hoping for, whatever happened, that it comes to a speedy resolution and that everybody's okay. We do have a very special guest with us today, and we're beyond excited to be able to introduce to the EWC community today, James Kierstead. And James is a really, really interesting guy that I'm going to give a quick little introduction around. But, we met him, and we've been making trouble together for probably a bulk of the summer this year. And thank goodness that he might also be a mentor to one or several of the members of our community for the EWC competition. James is responsible for serving the Entrepreneurs Organization out of Edmonton in Canada, but he's also the president and CEO of an organization and a company called Levin, also based out of Canada. They specialize in the design and manufacturing and sales of construction products and services. But in addition to that, he's been a lifelong entrepreneur with several companies under his belt. He's been committed to innovation, excellence, and enhancing people's lives, especially through his work in mentorship with EO and other organizations. He's a really, really special guy that we've been lucky to get to know, true friend of Gen Accelerates and the Entrepreneurship World Cup. So James, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we're really excited to learn from you today.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for the nice introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and let's see. Everyone see my screen okay? Carlos, do I get a thumbs up there?
Total.
Um,
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm super honored to be asked here to share my entrepreneurial journey. Um, and I guess the first question is, why would you even care? Why would you listen to a guy like me? I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I've owned several companies, some successfully, some not so successfully. I've been in entrepreneurs organization for the last 17 years, and I've successfully grown a number of companies, and two that I'm going to share with you stories around today: Arctic Spas and my current company, Levin. I have, in fact, lost everything twice, and I'm happy to say that I am still married 26 years, and my wife still putting up with my entrepreneurial behavior. I'm currently scaling my next company, Levin Electronics, which is, I hope, set to disrupt the home automation industry. So let me start with my Arctic Spas journey and what I've learned. Now, you may see me look down a little bit. I've taken some notes just to make sure that I don't miss anything in the story, because I think there's some real value in the experience that I had here. So in 1997, my partners and I bought a small company called Blue Falls Manufacturing. It was a struggling regional hot tub manufacturer that wasn't really making any money. Its sales were about 2.8 million, and it produced 900 spas a year, 800 of which my two of the business partners that I joined with, were actually buying through their retail stores. By 2007, we grew that company to produce over 10,500 spas annually. And this is kind of what it looked like in 2007. We had 3 factories in North America, 4 joint venture factories in China, warehouses in the United Kingdom, France, Estonia, and Australia, 250 dealers in some 30 countries, over 900 employees, 12 corporate retail stores on top of those dealerships. And just our businesses alone, not the dealers, just our conglomerate of businesses, combined annual revenue was about 110 million annually. We also, during that time, developed several patents in the industry and manufactured everything from spas, gazebos, injection molding, spa covers, LED lighting for pool and spa industry, and even billiards and games room tables. Everything very focused in the pool and spa industry at the time. And then finally, our last acquisition was in the electronic space. We decided to design and manufacture our own electronic controls, which I'll share later is how I ended up starting Levin. We had won just about every award possible in Canada, including one of Canada's 50 best managed companies, fastest growing companies in Canada for 5 years in a row, and Entrepreneur of the Year award back in 2005. Interestingly enough, I left that business in 2014 to focus on Levin. And my business partners actually won Entrepreneur of the Year award again in 2019. So it's quite a story how they've done. But this is kind of how the company looked like after 2008. I thought I'd share this with you because this was not just a story of a great rise, but it was a story of a great rise and an almost catastrophic failure. By 2009, we were down to 3 factories in North America. In 2011, we had exited all of our joint venture factories in China. Our dealership network decreased from 30 countries to 20 countries. We closed distribution center in all the distribution centers except for the United Kingdom. We'd reduced our number of employees by 300 and only have 4 corporate stores left. Combined annual revenue for the organization would be about 70 million. When I first started thinking about what I would present, I thought I would be, sharing a story about how a company can grow and scale as fast as we did. But thinking about that, lots of companies can go out and grow really, really fast and then be gone in a flash. I think there might be more to learn from our story of massive growth, an industry collapse, which in 2008, with the world financial crisis, hot tubs were a luxury item, and demand for that product fell off the map. Within 3 years, we had declined to 50% of what we were doing before. And it's come back since then. But I thought there might be a better story here in just navigating the pitfalls to survive something like this. So how does a company survive and thrive through an economic downturn? Well, it turns out that some of the fundamentals that got us to where we are and helped us grow also helped us survive. So I thought I would share with you today 5 sort of insights that I learned from this experience, and hopefully it'll help you. I'd say the first one is be unique or die. When we first took over Blue Falls Manufacturing, we bought this struggling manufacturer that had started in 1994. We bought it in 97. The name of the spas was Blue Falls. It's a pretty forgettable name. So we did 2 things. First, we redesigned the product and made it a lot more revolutionary in construction and our installation system that no other manufacturer was using. So most other companies were doing at the time what was called foam fill. We used a very unique way of insulating the outer walls, much like you do in a home here in North America. Then we had to come up with something that was way more memorable. And we decided on this interesting name, this oxymoron, Arctic Spas, because who has cold and spas mixed together? And it really suited us because we were, at the time, the most northern manufacturer of portable hot tubs in the world. So we were building a product that was really unique for our environment. And it turned out that building it to sustain that product in that kind of environment made our product incredibly durable no matter where it went. There were many competitors in our industry, and all of them criticized how we were doing things. And we accepted that criticism because, quite frankly, one, we absolutely knew through testing that our way was actually more efficient than what was being done in the past. But 2, there were 9, for every 9 manufacturers that, were doing it their way, there was us. And so if we could convince the end consumer that our product made sense, then really we were the best option for them. So the whole point of this is pick your unique proposition and live it. In business, if you're not in some way unique, you simply won't survive. We are seeing this firsthand in just about every industry today, where huge companies have lost their uniqueness and then lost significant market share or overnight, or even disappeared. Some great examples would be General Motors, Research in Motion, Skype. I mean, think of this. Skype had the lead in this online video conferencing, and here we are doing a webinar on Zoom, and Skype is being phased out by Microsoft. GE would be another one. Some of the best, most unique ideas never ever see the light of day because the company cannot articulate the value they bring to enough people to generate enough revenue quickly enough to survive the scale-up phase. We changed the way retail sales was done in our industry. We moved to consultative selling process that really educated the customer on materials, construction, and design choices, and how it affected efficiency, quality, and longevity of the product. We built training manuals and brought in salespeople from all over the world we had a training center right here just on the banks of the North Saskatchewan River here in Alberta. And we would spend a week with their salespeople from all over the world, training them on exactly how to sell our product effectively. We would even send out training sales teams to do dealers' trade shows, home shows, and things like that to help dealers really sell product and understand how that sales, how the selling process worked. And it was incredibly effective for us. Between 1997 and 2007, we grew more than 10 times. The third thing I'd say insight is that I learned is get the best people on the bus. One positive thing about an economic downturn like 2008, and like many of us are experiencing right now, is that it is freeing up the labor market. In our business, we're very entrepreneurial. We needed self-starters who were willing to make decisions and be accountable to them. Adding great people was a core principle in leveraging our business. And we used the 2008 crisis really to start changing out some C players that had come into the organization that you don't really see when you're scaling so fast, and bring on more A players. Since we were changing so fast, we needed people that could manage that change. And I'm experiencing exactly the same thing here at Levin. A players are the type of people that can really manage the intense amount of change that we have going on all the time. And those that can't, I can't say that I really apologize for it, because it is the nature of this, of business. Change is always happening. This is probably a different one that most people don't think about. Prepare for the worst. When I look back at our, the spa manufacturers and retailers that had gone out of business following the 2008 financial crisis, they all had a few things in common. A couple I've already mentioned, but there is also such things as not being unique and not having the best people on the bus. But there are a few other items as well. When our industry was experiencing its greatest period of growth, lots of those owners were taking large equity out of their businesses instead of saving for a rainy day. Consequently, when the market turned the other way, they were unable to cash flow their way through it. Whereas my business partners and I virtually left all of our earnings and equity in our company for more than a decade, which gave us a strong balance sheet to weather the storm. A couple of other things: undercapitalized expansion. When things are going really well and people like them decide, hey, let's expand, yet they're taking money out of their business and then investing in expansion and exacerbating their cash problem. Even though we were, so they'd open up more locations, they built bigger and better manufacturing plants, hired more people, and never took the time to ensure they had the right infrastructure to handle that expansion. The fact is, we made many of the same mistakes, but what saved us was we continued to hold as much of that cash in the business, preparing for the challenges and the mistakes that would inevitably come and will continue to come as long as you're trying to strike out in new ways. Yeah. And then I'd say, back one. The other big mistake was that companies often went through with downturns like this is failure to dump underperforming operations. You saw on one of the earlier slides how many tough choices we had to make going through this downturn. There's a saying, sometimes you have to cut off the limb to save the body. It is the hardest thing in the world to lay good people off. It's nothing I have ever enjoyed. And I accept responsibility when I make decisions that have put our businesses in the positions that they sometimes have found themselves in, which has created those challenges. But that doesn't change the fact that we still have to go about making sure that the business survives. And people that take action quickly as opposed to waiting for things to turn, will often be the ones that survive. And I'd say finally, be really intimate with your numbers. In August of 2008, our controller left us. Wonderful timing, as you can imagine, because that's about when the crisis was really hitting North America squarely. It forced me to take over the financing department of our company. Now, I'm like most business owners. I had a pretty good knowledge of accounting and our numbers, but I never realized how much more I needed to be intimate with those numbers. Understanding where all our money went was really one of my biggest challenges. Our controller was a good accountant, but at the end of the day, it wasn't his money. So when we, the owners, made poor decisions, and believe me, that happened plenty, that negatively impacted cash flow, he accepted it and tried to work it out and make it work. But once I got a look at the numbers, I was able to sit down on an equal basis with my business partners. I had 3 of them in the business. And from that point forward, I committed to looking at those numbers and really learning about how to understand how they impact each other. Because we were your typical, I'd call us income statement owners. And the great thing about managing your business from the income statement is it seems pretty simple. The problem with it is, without looking at how your decisions impact your working capital, which is a balance sheet ratio, without understanding that, it can look like you are making money, but the problem is you could be spending it through investment in whole other areas. So we had this business where the main business was a cash cow and generated lots of revenue, and all the other businesses that eventually got terminated were really leeches. They were sucking cash out of the main business for years. It's not something we really noticed until I dive in. Once I got in there and started really scrutinizing our cash position, and when I say be intimate with your numbers, I'd say mostly be intimate with your cash and how your numbers, how what you're doing impacts cash. This allowed us to react more quickly to the downturn, and it really saved us millions of dollars. So now let's talk about my latest passion, Levin Electronics. My latest passion is really about making intelligent buildings available to everyone. Now, I'm born to a single parent family. I have a twin brother and a sister, and we grew up poor by Canadian standards. And I've always believed that things should be available to everyone. In this past number of years, I've been really focused on how to develop sustainable innovations that could be available to even people that have moderate incomes, not just for the wealthy. This business, I originally bought it as a vertical integration play for Arctic Spas. I still manufacture all the control systems for Arctic. And I'm very fortunate that I have a team here that has almost 3 decades of experience in electronic design and manufacturing. And we're leveraging their skills and talents and the facilities to improve people's lives every day. We work with builders and professional contractors to make intelligent buildings available to everyone. So what are we really trying to solve? We believe that only when controls throughout the entire home are smart can people really get the results they want from technology. The fact is, there's lots of great smart home technology out there. The problem is, it's actually an economic issue that keeps it from becoming ubiquitous. So we started looking at the economics of home automation and found that we came up with a way to reduce labor and materials that offset the cost of the technology so that all the switches in the home could just be smart. It really broke down to this. We took the standard light switch and we broke it down into its 2 components, the rocker, which you interact with every day, and the load controller or power controller that actually breaks the power on or off. And we hypothesized that if we could split those two apart, we could move the load controller close to where the load was and eliminate all that control wiring in the house. And the savings on the material and the labor would actually offset the cost of the technology. And we'd use wireless communication, RF communication, much like most of you have in your vehicle with your key fob, to allow the components to turn the power system or the light on or off. Now, the value of the concept revealed itself as we developed the business model and the product design. Eliminating the wire between the light and the switch was solving several very large problems in construction. First was the trending skilled labor shortage here in North America. Each year, more people are leaving the existing trades than are people entering it. And this is eliminating labor from installing a switch, which allows the trade to get more done with the same amount of people. Second, it showed promise to respond to home builders' ambition to complete projects faster. Since the electrical contractor, the drywaller, the painter, the cabinet maker, the tiler could all get through the production of the home faster because there's no switch boxes, builders could actually save 2 to 3 days in their production cycle. And finally, the financial benefits of lowering building costs while actively participating in conserving millions of tons of copper, steel, and plastic each year. And of course, you and I benefit because now switches can go anywhere. You put them in your car, by your bed, or wherever they are needed. You can save energy with all off switches or timers, and you can switch lights on in more than one room for safety and convenience. And we've included mobile device access. We add a Levin queue, and anytime a customer can access their home from locally or through the cloud, they can program it and personalize it, create zones, master switches, change switch operations, set timers, basically create an inexpensive smart home. And so what have we learned on this journey? Well, the first thing we learned, it's an amazingly simple technology, completely capable of changing the way we wire buildings today. But as Max Planck, the Nobel Prize winner who originated quantum theory, said, a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because the opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that's familiar with it. And so far, that's been our experience of switching in North America. This is where we got our first lesson in launching new, potentially disruptive product to the market. We failed to thoroughly research the broader market and all the stakeholders' buying behaviors before developing, certifying, and bringing wire-free switch products to market. And the product has struggled to gain traction. The building code inspectors followed regulations written around a switch that was patented in 1917 that required wire. The regulations didn't say wire-free controls could be used, so our bureaucratic officials took the safe road and said no. Now, I am pleased to say that after 5 years of working with governments in Canada and the United States and the code bodies, we have successfully gained access to the US market starting this year with the National Electrical Code changing. 2 provinces in Canada have already accepted, and in 2021, it looks like the National Building Code in Canada will change as well. But it automatically added 5 years to what we thought was going to be our scaling plan. So it's been challenging. And I would argue that as a normal startup, we probably wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for the fact that I have this ongoing contract manufacturing business that just generates revenue for us and gross margin that helps offset our operating costs. So I can see why some companies had to raise so much money to bring products to market. which actually brings me to my next thing. Raising capital, it really is a double-edged sword. You know, Levin is the first company that I ever raised outside equity with. We're fortunate that we have a sustainable contract manufacturing business that covers most of our expenses. However, we still needed to raise capital to develop the devices and software platform they operate on. Our first raise was for 1.9 million, and we have raised a total of just over 3 million. It was a relief to have the capital that we needed to finish the product and expand. However, it created this sense of urgency to scale more quickly, which caused myself in particular to make two significant mistakes. Firstly, we hired an expensive sales team in the United States before the code had been cleared. And this ended up in us letting go the entire sales team 8 months after getting nowhere in the market. And then we rushed to hiring our first software development team, which was led by someone who hadn't done what we were trying to accomplish on the platform side. And we ended up having to after a year, let that entire team go. So a year and a half later, we had wasted, and we also wasted about $1 million in that money that we raised. These two endeavors, simply came because I put myself under this unnecessary pressure to accelerate quickly so I could meet the requirements of our institutional investors. And I actually don't blame them either. They were very clear about what they expected from us in the front. And they never actually put that pressure on myself. I found myself putting that pressure on me. And that's where that, mistake. Had we not raised that money, I would have done what I did in my previous business, which was organically grow that, that base and allow it to develop at its own pace for the most part. Turned out that pace was still crazy fast, and it felt like a ride we had to hang on to. We also had to figure out how to overcome the electrical contractors and the builders' fear of risk. The Levin offer promises significant construction efficiencies for developers and builders, a 25% increase in labor capacity for electrical trade, and gives building owners new ways to personalize the installation. Yet, the increase in performance was not great enough to outweigh the perceived risks. To move builders, we basically had to build out calculators that helped them complete complete the cost structure, because interestingly enough, the way jobs are actually quoted in the construction industry is on a whole home basis, not by switch. So they didn't actually know how much a switch cost them to actually install in a house. So we had to actually build out calculators. We had to work with them and their electrical contractors, who, by the way, none were really that willing to share their information with us. It took a lot of time and a few of them to trust us. And over time, we were able to get the data to prove that we could deliver their customers far more value than a standard switch without actually increasing the cost over what they were doing today. Ultimately, we continued to drive out costs and matched the installed switch price they were replacing. So basically, we had to make the switch free and mobile device accessible to move them. So that takes us to disrupting innovation. When we first considered decentralizing home automation, we asked ourselves, is there a large enough population who historically has not had the money, equipment, or skill to do this themselves, and has, as a result, gone without it, or have had to pay professionals to come and do it for them? And let's face it, home automation has really been available only to the wealthy until now. The everyday homeowner simply hasn't had the access to smart home technology throughout the entire home at a cost they can really afford. Then we had to ask ourselves, is our innovation disruptive to all the significant incumbents in the industry? And by that, I mean, is it so different and the value proposition so strong that it can unseat the way things are now? Because if the innovation is merely incremental, an incremental improvement of one or more significant players in the industry, odds are that innovation won't actually win. In the past years as a tech entrepreneur, I've learned that few technologies are intrinsically disruptive. Rather, it's the business model that the technology enables that creates the disruptive impact. And it is often novel combinations of existing off-the-shelf components applied cleverly to a small fledgling market value chain, which delivers previously unnoticed benefits. For example, we focus solely on the residential new construction market, not the larger renovation and retrofit markets, because so many new home automation products are attempting to dominate that. Because frankly, if a switch is already in the box, our value proposition isn't as strong. By focusing on large new builders, we could move large chunks of business in a very short period of time and reduce our pool of necessary contacts to dominate the entire industry. And at Levin, to do this, we had to shift our energy to where the growth is. So we moved our focus from the small hot tub industry to the multi-billion-dollar home automation industry, build new offerings from the ground up. We had to reimagine the common centralized home automation concept to a wirelessly connected, inexpensive building blocks that connected through a wireless network, making controls capable of competing head-on with traditional wired solutions and delivering the benefits of mobile device access and programmability. Then we had to customize our objectives and targets and metrics so that the entire company could see how we were doing as we developed and worked towards competing in this market space. The other thing that was really unique, we're really two businesses. We have this service-based business, the contract manufacturing business, and then we have this new product development business, which really is very much a startup in a lot of ways. And I had to take on the drive on that side of the business while letting someone else in our business really focus on the service side. By separating the two internally, we were able to give it the focus that it really needed without creating a vacuum in the other business. And I'd say the last thing is I'm happy to report that 3 of the top 5 builders in North America have completed pilots with us or are currently negotiating national agreements. And we're in discussions with 16 of the top 20 builders in the US. Now we have a new problem to overcome. The scale that is possible will easily outstrip our production. To meet demand and compete, we have to redesign our controller to allow us to automate production from start to finish. Couple that with a significant equipment investment, we will be able to produce our product quickly and cheaply enough that it will be hard for incumbents or low-cost overseas manufacturers to undercut us as the product lifecycle moves towards commodity. This is when the platform and provisioning customization will create value that should help us compete for some time to come. So quite frankly, a simple yet disruptive idea to separate the switch into its 2 components is poised to disrupt this new industry and improve the way people live their lives every day. With that, I'll open it up to questions. I'll just stop sharing my screen here. And yeah, I hope that was helpful.
It was. Thank you, James. A lot of great insights and some very interesting some stories that came through, and several questions did come in. One of the things that I was looking at as you were discussing in the beginning was around some of the points around like sales strategies that you had been talking about before. And, you know, on several instances where I've been mentoring, I've come across some of my mentees where I've tried to position the opportunity for them to engage in like consultative sales. Do you have any type of strategies around how to best deploy that type of sales tactic with your stakeholders or leads or
Sure. I'm going to take a step further back, Carlos, and I'm going to start with, we spend a lot of time actually going through the value proposition and meeting with clients that, you know, that are going to use our products and services to really understand what their needs are first. I think this is a step a lot of businesses skip. I'm a big believer in the value proposition canvas. We spent a lot of time on it with all the stakeholders. So we took it to distribution, we took it to the electrical contractors, we took it to builders, and we really tried to understand where their pain points were. Once we understood that, our sales pitch, so to speak, is now very little about the money or about the product, and way more about their needs and what their objectives are, and how our system can help them support those objectives that they're trying to hit. Because the reality is, they don't care about our technology, they don't care about Levin, they care about what it will do for them. So I would tell business owners, start there.
Great. There was another point that you had mentioned earlier on around starting to, you know, to look and understand a lot about, you know, the inner workings of how the company is spending and really becoming intimate, quote unquote, with the numbers. But is there ever a moment where, in speaking to entrepreneurs, where the entrepreneur can ever justify hanging on to, you know, some part of the company or a product line, et cetera, that might just be burning cash, but to actually hold on to it?
I would say the answer is no, and I'll give you an example. So we consider the products that I make for Arctic Spas to be our products, because I'm so close with those guys. They're still, you know, I'm not a business partner with them anymore, but I was their business partner for 17 years, and we're still good friends. So I treat that as one of our products. But we also were doing contract manufacturing for other businesses. And I was doing exactly that, Carlos. I was hanging on to it because of the revenue that it was bringing in. And when COVID hit this year, we could not continue because we had to reduce our staff levels so much during that period. And I looked back at our finances, and I realized that it was only contributing like 6% to our overall revenue. So I started, what was hiding there was the cost. We thought the cost of operating that part of our business was really quite low, but in turn, it was actually impacting our capacity on our products that we run regularly. And it affected our efficiency so much that we were actually losing money on it. So I killed the division entirely. And with 9 less people on our production floor, I produce more product than I was producing back then. So I'd say knowing the numbers is one thing. Having the guts to make decisions based on what those numbers are telling you is absolutely imperative.
To that end, I guess, like, the burden of leadership weighs heavy, obviously, on the CEO in instances like that, and needing to understand exactly when and how to cut. What are some of the things that you were able to do to overcome some of those like mental obstacles that might either prevent you from acting as quickly as you'd like, or you know, in one way or another, maybe you just have you avoid, in some instances, some of that conflict?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One is I have a really strong, experienced leadership team, and I built that team from the beginning. Um, I've always been in companies or owned companies where I've had a minority shareholder. I've never actually, in fact, Levin, I did own for a short time. I owned a majority share in this business, but I sold it off as I brought in my business partner Marv, my manufacturing manager, my CFO, because quite frankly, I believe we'll be stronger together. And I think the overall value of what I'm creating will be worth more than just me having it on my own. And I'm not afraid about not owning controlling interest, because the reality is the shareholders of this business want, if I continue to do a good job, if I do my job, they want me to continue to operate it. They don't want to come in and operate it. And then, so that team is really, really important. The second part is, I would say, having EO or network like you have with Global Entrepreneur Network, that has been invaluable to me in the last 17 years. I mean, those people are my therapy group. Those, and I know that if I screw it all up, if I make a mistake that will cost me everything, there is so many people that I've become close friends with through EO over all these past 17 years that will pick me up, they will dust me off, they'll kick me in the butt, and they'll get me going again. And what that breeds is confidence. And confidence in an entrepreneur is incredibly important. It allows us to make quick and difficult decisions when necessary.
That's great. I wanted to make a quick little pivot here into talking about product development.
Sure.
And I guess part of this will come into some manufacturing as well, but thinking about just the development of prototypes. So how many cycles of or versions of prototypes did you actually start to roll out before you had something that was ready to go to market? And I guess as kind of a second to that question is understanding some of the costs associated with actually going through this type of prototyping cycle.
Yeah. So we have been a big believer in iteration, where all of our innovation happens through iteration. And in Arctic, we started doing our own prototyping for jets and fittings way back. We literally owned the first rapid prototyping machine in Western Canada, so that we could develop our own products and prototype them and test them prior to going to molds. Because as you probably know, Carlos, going to the injection molding process and getting it wrong is a really expensive proposition. Now, rapid prototyping has reduced so much in cost that we can iterate like crazy. So, for example, today we're going through a redesign on a new switch design that we're working on, and I think we've been through 5 prototypes already, and we're still not going to molds yet because we want to make sure we absolutely get it right. There's no excuse nowadays not to spend a lot of time on rapid prototyping. For our business, the electronics side, prototyping is actually quite easy for us, and it's where our skill set really is. So we'll typically get it right in two, sometimes as little as 2 tries, but typically no more than 3 prototypes before we're ready to go. But on the mechanical side, that always proves to be the biggest challenge for our team, because we're electronics more than in fact, I actually bought part of a machining and injection molding business right here in Edmonton to help with our, not only just our prototyping, but onshoring some of our manufacturing back to Canada, reduce the cash cycle and increase the supply line speed.
That's that's a really good segue to my next question, because it was more around now some of the tips and best practices that you have about either sourcing manufacturers or even choosing to do some of this in-house. What are some of the benefits and the risks that you see for quote unquote, like hiring locally or finding local manufacturers versus sourcing, somewhere abroad where,
Sure.
somewhere in
There's
Asia, et cetera?
Well, I'll start with a broad. Some of the challenges. So I've been doing business in China since 1995, and set up our first JV there in 2001. And I would. It has been a really interesting experience, both good and challenging. The first thing you have to consider is your cash cycle. If you go overseas, your cash cycle is going to go probably anywhere from 60 to 90 days at most here in North America to 180 days. So if you don't consider that, you could actually run yourself out of cash. If you're in manufacturing, you could actually run yourself out of cash because your cycle is so long. So you really have to pay attention to that. Secondly, you're giving up QA and you're giving up design control to a certain extent. While we have quite specific design parameters, oftentimes what happens is the manufacturers will have their own ideas about how things need to go through their plant, and they end up changing something that they think is small, but actually ends up being quite a big challenge for you in your manufacturing plant. And then finally, the supply chain length also increases, and risk on that supply chain increases because you have so many potential options for error to occur. Your stuff can get held at multiple borders. It can get held on the ocean. It can get held. Duties can come in. We've just seen that in the United States. Arbitrarily adding a 25% duty to most products coming out of China. So that international supply chain, the benefit of it is you can reduce labor costs. So as time went on, that labor cost gap has shrunk since when I first went to China. And we really had to take very careful aim at what products we had produced that were the highest labor component to it. And then now what we're looking at is, can we reduce that labor component by automation and keep it local and get all those other benefits of having your supply line really close to you, so that if problems happen, you can access them quickly. And if you need to scale up, you can scale more quickly. So I'm a fan of trying to keep your supply line closer. After all of these years of doing all the way I have, I'd say my preference is if I could keep my supply chain close, I'd prefer it.
Thanks, James. I'm going to take a couple questions here from the thread.
Sure.
Slight, nice praise here from one of our participants. Says, I love the idea of wireless switching. So the follow-on question to that now is, how are you addressing security concerns, hacking, disruptions, etc.?
Oh yeah. So because we are selling to the builder, there's an expectation that when that home turns over, that product works just like a regular light switch and as reliably. So we first built an ecosystem that forms its own network, and all those devices are encrypted and signed here at our plant. So when new devices are brought into the network, they have to be manually paired into the network, which is a bit of it's not difficult, but it requires human proximity, which is really the best level of security. And by doing that, what we do is we eliminate this possibility for spoofing or creating fake devices to come onto the network. They do a handshake using a crypto cipher. And of course, all the traffic all the wireless messaging is also encrypted. So it's as sophisticated or more sophisticated than almost all the IoT stuff that's out on the market today. My head of engineering and myself are both really very concerned about security. So you can actually operate our home without connecting to the cloud whatsoever. And your biggest risk in home automation is actually your connection at the cloud. It's the passwords people put into their gateways and their routers.
Another follow-on question here, and this was talking about some of the things that you were mentioning around iterative prototyping. Just for clarification, someone said, do you mean 3D printing when you say rapid prototyping?
Yeah, 3D printing. I say when we originally did it, it was called stereolithography, but now it's just, there's all sorts of different ways of doing 3D prototyping. Yes.
Question here around markets, and I think this one might focus a little bit more
Sure.
to both North, but potentially international. You operate outside of North America, and what difference do you see with markets within North America versus anywhere else?
Yeah, so today Levin does not operate outside of North America, and there's a good reason for that. The market here is very, very large, and we wanted to prove out the system locally where we could really keep an eye on how it progressed before we took it internationally. Because every new market we enter, we're talking about new certification rules, new wireless communication certification requirements. Our product runs on a 900 megahertz band, between 903 and 927 megahertz, and in Europe that band isn't open, so we have to look at product redesign, we have to look at certification changes. So that we decided, let's shelve that, let's wait, let's build up the base here before we go entering in new markets. Now with Arctic, it was a little different. We were at a time when the Canadian dollar was probably the lowest it's ever been, about 66 cents to the US dollar, and every Canadian manufacturer was going down into the US market. We noticed at that time that Europe was just starting to catch on to hot tubs. So while we had some business going in the US, our focus was actually in 1999, we put our first warehouse in the United Kingdom. And that really springboarded us into Europe. But it was a lesson and a half because we didn't have all the right certifications in some of the markets. The expectation of how a product works in some of those regions and quality were different than the expectations here in North America. And it was a real learning experience for us at the time. I'd like to say that now, we understand that a lot better. But I would say if you really want to grow, really understand your local market before you go outside of your local market, because it will get very expensive very quickly.
What type of strategies did you deploy when working with government or with local leaders or policymakers? Because some of the things that you're talking about around, understanding some of the legal limitations, around trying to build this this innovative product in the beginning required, changes to either code or what were some of the tactics that you used in order to help push this along?
Sure. So I'll preface this by saying our first 2 years of trying to move code here in Canada met with nothing, and the US, but mostly Canada, met with nothing but frustration. All we really did was upset the inspections community, because we were, I think I joked with one of my entrepreneurial friends that we were kind of like a Roomba. We were just zooming around, bouncing off walls, trying to figure it out, because we really didn't have any idea. Until one day I met with a local provincial politician who had been doing some lobbying, and he had the right connections and helped me connect to the right people. And so we ended up doing a multi-pronged strategy in which we were looking at government, at a couple of different departments within the government, as well as the municipal affairs, which handles the code in Alberta. And those governments were environmental and labor, because we have a product that globally should be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions significantly just by reducing the materials going into buildings. But it still took some time. And what I learned from that is go find good, experienced lobbying groups to help you with it, because navigating the bureaucratic channels proved to be really almost impossible for us. Does that help?
Yeah, totally. I can imagine how painful and stressful that those moments were.
And we had a little bit of luck too, by the way. It turned out a big company global company was trying to move the national electrical code, and our submissions went in at the same time, so we were able to convince them to let our submission tack on to theirs, and that made a big difference.
Huge. I wanted to follow up here. Another question that came in a little bit earlier was around KPIs, and just pretty straightforward question. So what type of KPIs are you tracking? And I guess kind of in addition to that, what would you recommend that other entrepreneurs kind of add to their sort of like dashboards or anything like that for monitoring?
Sure. So we track a mix of forward-looking KPIs and, I'd call that back-looking, or the word's skipping me at the moment. But I've got about 15 items on our scorecard. So we'll track things like how many new builders do we have coming into the funnel. We'll track how many we've given presentations to, how many have moved to agreements. Then we track the more data-driven stuff, which is, how many orders have we had? How much units have we actually shipped out the door? What is our cash position? That is arguably my revenue and cash. I'm watching that every single week, because we are still a startup in a lot of ways, and cash is king. So that has to be a real clear visibility. Then we have some metrics around manufacturing, so we can see what our productivity looks like. So we measure for productivity, it's simple: revenue per production employee. We want to see that. We have targets for that, and if we're hitting those targets, we know that we've got about the right staffing level. It's not about trying to make them work harder, but make them work efficiently. And then we look for things like in our supply chain, are we sitting on kits that have back orders on them, and how many back order items do we have? Obviously, our goal is to try and drive that down. I could share an example of our scorecard with you, Carlos, if you want to make it available to people. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. That'd be great, James. And then I don't know how much time you have left, but I think maybe one or two questions, if that's okay, or?
Sure, yeah, happy to.
Awesome. So questions coming in here as well from one of our platforms. You had mentioned that you wasted a year and about $1 million of investment. How did you manage the situation with your investors? How did you manage to keep the business going during this time? And what would be your advice for startups in a similar situation?
So, I'm very fortunate in that the leadership team is the largest investment group. And because of my previous success, I have a lot of my own cash, and my brother, who was also one of my previous partners. So from that perspective, we have as a group of shareholders, we kind of control things. But, interestingly enough, our institutional investors have been stellar. They get that this does not always go as planned. And I can't say enough how supportive they have been through this. I didn't really have to do anything except be transparent, be honest. So I set up a quarterly reporting system that shares our scorecards, our rocks that we complete. I'm a big believer in the traction operating system for business. They call it EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. I think that having a system, having transparency is way better than trying to hide things. They know what the heck is going on. These people have been in business and been doing this a long time. There is nothing that we can do that will surprise them. What they don't like is losing trust. And I'd say that's where I've had my best experiences with them. I've been so forthright and so transparent that having them continue to trust me as the leader of the business has been really quite easy.
That's those are some great parallel points to another conversation that we had earlier in a separate webinar with someone else. So echoing that sentiment, I agree 100%. The trust is critical. Last question here for you, James, and then I'll give you back the rest of your afternoon. What are your thoughts on acquiring pre-sales before a commercially ready product is available?
I think that's fantastic if you can do it. I'll give you an example. We grew the number of doors this past year. Our fiscal year end ended in May, and we grew the number of doors by 147% year-over-year growth. And that was on the promise that our gateway platform and app would be released. And the gateway platform and app got released 10 months later than it was supposed to. So in effect, we were doing just that, selling a promise. The only thing I will say is if you do sell a promise, deliver it or find a way to properly, resolve it with the people that support you, because, the last thing you want is to have people out there that are saying, listen, you can't trust this person. Because at the end of the day, that's what we get to carry with us from business to business, from opportunity to opportunity, is trust that we'll do the right thing for all those who interact with us.
And I think on that note, we can close the books on this week. We'd really like to thank James for presenting and sharing his insights and all of the ins and outs of the endeavors that he's been in previously and currently. If you are tuning in and watching from any one of the platforms or following up later during the week, James is also going to be one of our mentors during the Accelerate 2 phase of the Entrepreneurship World Cup. So you just might be placed with him. And how lucky would you be? That sounds like it would be a really cool thing. I will probably be, trying to sneak in a session every now and then if I can. So thank you, James, for your time. And, on
Thank
behalf
you,
of everybody at EWC, we had a blast today.
It's been a pleasure. Sorry if I couldn't answer everyone's questions. If you need, you can find me on LinkedIn and shoot me a question. I try my best to answer as quickly as possible.
Thanks. And for everybody else, again, just final note, if you are in Global Pool, deadline for your deliverables is going to be the 10th of August, 11:59 Miami time. So until next week, keep working hard, stay safe, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Carlos. Thanks, everyone.